This isn't my usual type of video or style of video, so if you want more of this kind of stuff, like, comment, share it. And if you're new and you like it, subscribe. It'll let me know that this kind of thing is welcome. Also, this is not going to be as explicitly political as my usual content, and I am not a film critic, nor am I an expert on cinema. This is, as I said, very new to me as a video thing. And it's a nice distraction from the looming HBO Rome video that just sort of haunts my dreams at this point. But I'll remind you, before we go into it, that everything I say here, it's an opinion. Art and the enjoyment of art is subjective. My thoughts and feelings about Dune Part 2 aren't a personal attack on you. They don't invalidate how you feel. They're just reflections that I have about an adaptation of a piece of fiction that is very important to me for sentimental reasons. In case it's not obvious, spoiler warning for Dune Part 2, and probably for some of the books, probably all of the books. It's probably safe to assume that's the case. Okay, look, this was originally meant to be a short, but every time I tried to record this, it ended up being too long. I felt like I needed to explain myself better, and explaining yourself better just means it takes a bit more time than you can get into a YouTube short or a TikTok or whatever. I'm not going to make a habit out of this kind of content, at least I'm going to try not to, but I need to get some thoughts and feelings about Dune Part 2 and Dune generally off my chest. So this is happening. Just sort of make your peace with it if you're here. Before I justify my incredibly inflammatory opinion in the thumbnail and title, I just want to explain what Dune means to me. As a formerly extremely dorky teen who spent a lot of their time trying to be someone they weren't, I wasted a lot of my time as a kid playing sports despite an immense lack of talent, when what I really wanted to be doing was what I did on select evenings where that wasn't what I was doing, which was playing video games and reading books. One of those books was a collection of the first Dune trilogy. It is literally this book here, this one here. It's literally this one. I devoured this as a timid, I want to say 14-year-old, but I'm not 100% on that. But I spent a lot of time reading this. This book, I actually went back to my parents to get it for my partner to read. Like that's how this is the Dune trilogy. This is very much my one. And I think it would take a lot to get me to part with it. But I say all of that to made a loud noise there to forget that's a big tone. But I say all of that to provide a bit of context to all of this. I wanted Dune to succeed. I want there to be a film adaptation worthy of the experience the books give you, and I was really excited for this film. I loved the first one, and I let myself get a bit excited for Dune Part 2. I also want to explain to you the things that I'm not going to be saying or getting into for important reasons in this sort of pseudo-review type thing. I guess this is kind of an SK Reviews in a sense. So yeah, what I'm not getting into is I'm not critiquing Dune Part 2 because it's gone woke or something, because I'm not a try-hard loser attempting to get on the anti-wokeness grift. Primarily because I'm not a racist. Secondarily because it would insult the intelligence of most of the people in the audience for these videos. I will say though that if anything, the film is pandering a little too much to the middle of the road American conservatism by not using the term jihad. I mean, I get it, it's not going to be palatable to an American audience, but also it just kind of bothered me. But also, look, if you want your film to be a success in the English speaking world, I guess you need the median American to have watched your film. I get it, doesn't mean I have to like it. Although it is very funny to see that Ben Shapiro has put out a review of Dune where he seems to have not understood anything about Dune, because conservatives cannot do media analysis. I'm also not going to criticize deviations from the source material too much. Well, I'll do a little bit of it probably as we go through this, but mostly about how it was used rather than the deviations themselves. That's because, as far as I'm concerned, once you adapt across mediums, it becomes its own thing. Thankfully, most of what I've seen has been pretty positive towards the deviations in terms of presentation of certain characters and deviations from the actual story as written in the books. And I think responding that way is actually one of the things that where Dune Part 2 could actually change cinema, unlike the way that people say it's going to change cinema, but I'll get into that a bit later. But it will contribute to better adaptations as time goes on if you maintain that attitude across fandoms. A good example of this is the video by Kyle Shilai. I'm sorry. That name is probably Hungarian and I can't say it, so I'm going to go with Silagi. Yes, and if that's wrong, someone can correct me. But they've embraced the deviation from the book that I might get into myself a bit later on. But all in all, I'd say there's a healthier attitude to this than I expected, and that's good. So well done, team. 3, the final thing I won't really be getting into is I won't be giving the film the benefit of the doubt because it's the middle film in an incomplete trilogy. That's not what I want to do here, and of course, you know, you have to accept that there are certain threads that will get tied up narratively later on, and it may be that this film is this era's Empire Strikes Back, but for now, as a film that Denis Villeneuve says should be accessible as a standalone film, I'm just comfortable judging it as such and taking it on its own merits. If you want the shortest form of my thoughts on the film, if you had me at gunpoint and said, rate this film out of 10, I'd give it a 7. Maybe that doesn't qualify it as mid, and so if you're feeling a little baited by that, sorry, but you know, that's just sort of the game here on YouTube.com. But I have to acknowledge that my particular feelings about the film are pretty well out of step with the public. The Rotten Tomatoes rating for both critics and audience are in the 90s as of writing. Dune Part 2 is also considered the 12th best film of all time on IMDb, ahead of Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and Empire Strikes Back, which, you know, I mean, look, it's all subjective, and maybe that's kind of my point. But since its release, Dune Part 2 has been subject to videos claiming it's already changed cinema, that it's not just changing cinema, that it has changed it. And I just don't see what it is that it does so radically from the mainstream body of cinema to justify those opinions. Do we really believe that Dune Part 2 is better than The Two Towers or Empire Strikes Back? Look, it's a tough sell, if you ask me, a very tough sell. Now, I accept that, as I said earlier, the ratings and rankings in IMDb are subjective. I mean, is Forrest Gump the 11th best film of all time? I don't think so. I think that Dune Part 2 has been the beneficiary of the collapse of the superhero genre's dominance, and that there's been a sort of post-superhero dominance desire to bury, particularly Marvel, let's be honest, but just generally the superhero genre as a whole. Really, the only superhero genre stuff that I see get widespread praise is stuff where they try something a bit different, and, you know, that's justified. That's justified. The thing is that the superhero genre's dominance was always just sort of a function of time. It was always going to end. All empires crumble, after all. I should know, I live in the heart of a decaying one. Or long decayed one, perhaps. Yeah, I remember going to see Iron Man in the cinema, mostly because my best friend at the time worked at the cinema and got us free tickets. I was 14 when that happened, and I'm 29 now. So that era was pretty much going to be on the way out by now, and it had to come to an end, and now that era has, I would say, pretty decisively ended. People are really clinging to good films and elevating them to own Marvel. That's fine, but in doing so, we're saying something that's good, and I will emphasize as much as I need to. It is a good film. Is the 12th best film of all time? Does that feel right? Does that really feel like that's correct? And I suppose that's what I'm thinking about here with my gut instinct is I don't think that's correct. I do want to talk about the things that Dune Part 2 did well. because, you know, I'm a positive person. I like talking about good things and things that I like. I think it's a good adaptation that takes a difficult text to translate into film and does it well. In particular, I think that certain deviations from the source material worked really well, as that Kyle Shilagi, I'm saying it different ways every time, I'm so sorry, points out in their video. The decision to position Jessica as an explicit narrative antagonist, pulling Paul down towards the path of jihad, it's much needed in a film where the primary narrative antagonists are quite displaced, certainly in terms of physical location from Paul. There's not a single performance that I think is bad among the cast. I want to particularly praise Austin Butler as Fade Ralpha, just a perfect, grim, awful boy who's clearly got a crush on Twink Paul. Like, it's just true. That's just true. Look, that's canon to me. It's just facts, okay? But honorable mentions have to go to the performances of Javier Bardem as Stilgar and Stellan Skarsgård as Baron Harkonnen. But honestly, I could have picked out just about anyone, and it would have been worth a mention. So don't take that as me saying only those performances were good. Like, pretty much from top to bottom, it was good. There are great set pieces dotted throughout the film, and it really does make for an excellent spectacle at times, particularly the worm riding and just anything happening on Gady Prime. I just love Gady Prime. I just love it, okay? But also the finale, the duel between Fade Ralpha and Paul, it's tense, it's fun, it's well performed, it's just so good. It's so good. The aesthetics and the vibes are impeccable, and it's such a good adaptation that when I imagine Dune, I do kind of imagine the aesthetic from the Denis Villeneuve films now, even if I still imagine Paul as the original actor from the Lynch films. That's my twink right there. That's my twink. This all sounds great, right? So what's the problem? There are really two key ones that I find are keeping this from being great in my head, like transcendentally great. So I want to acknowledge that it's clear that Dune is a difficult text to adapt to film, and there are a lot of reasons why that's the case, but a big part of it is that in the books, we tend to just get a lot of perspectives that you kind of can't adapt to film. Like, you can't just have characters say how they feel and what they're thinking. Look, there's a great Futurama clip that I'm going to put here that will explain exactly how ridiculous that is.
You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry.
You just can't project inner thoughts and feelings of the characters as obviously as you can in a book when a text is dense, but also heavily reliant on that sort of internal monologuing, internal thoughts. And it does raise challenges, and challenges that I'd say that the first film handled better, while also doing all of the things required of being a first film, you know, introducing you to the world, getting you situated in it, making it feel like an actual lived-in setting. The challenge presented is, how do you take 2 hours and 45 minutes to present the necessary content from the source material while still being able to add your own flair to it? And that's an issue the film kind of runs into, and it's what I kind of call the Watchmen problem. For those of you not aware, Watchmen is a 2009 film based on the Watchmen comics, which, yeah, I mean, that's kind of obvious. I don't know why I clarified that. But the film is around 2.5 hours long, and maybe it's just me, but that film feels like an eternity. Part of this in the case of Watchmen is that it's not helped by having possibly the worst sex scene in film history in it. Also, Watchmen just lacks the impeccable vibes that Dune Part 2 has. Instead, Dune Part 2 feels long in parts broken up by set pieces. And part of the reason why I think it feels long is that it took the dialogue, the politicking, the other parts that were in the book, and just kind of glossed over them. It felt like it jumped from spectacle to spectacle and took whatever path it needed to get to the spectacle, and that made it feel long in places. There are stretches of the film that do feel a bit like an eternity, and I don't like saying this. It was kind of boring at times. And that's not... Look, I like politicking. I like discussion. I like good dialogue. I like seeing characters interact. But there were just points where it didn't feel like that worked in the film. For me, I'm kind of at a loss with a text like Dune as to how you make the film feel as if it's longer than it is. Like, Dune has plenty of content. Even if you sort of accept that a significant portion of it doesn't translate well to film, there's still so much there you can do. The other issue, which is related to this how do you use the content, how do you distribute the content issue is that it feels too short at the same time. It feels as though the film is aware of how pleasing it is aesthetically, how good the vibes are. So sometimes it just feels like the content that was picked out was stretched very thin. And when the content is stretched thin, I think that means you miss a lot of opportunities. Some of those points would have landed better and been more entertaining if it was supported better in other parts of the script. This isn't about deviations from the source material so much as choices about what to emphasize and what is chosen to be abridged for the sake of the adaptation. And the thing is, I'm not entirely sure what choices you necessarily make differently if you're making a film, but something about it felt like a film that had run out of energy around the 2-hour mark, and then was relying on these sort of impeccable vibes to keep going, which is a valid strategy, but is it the way that an all-time great film feels? I don't think so. I just don't think so. Essentially what my issue boils down to is you can't sustain a film over 2 hours long on vibes alone. Yes, great films and great adaptations have had great vibes. Look, Lord of the Rings comes to mind, right? And all of those films aren't exactly short. They're not exactly short films. So this isn't, oh, SK doesn't like long films, they have ADHD or something. This isn't that sort of thing. But the Lord of the Rings films do not feel longer than they are, while also feeling as if the material has been stretched thin, when you know that the source material is actually rather dense in the case of Lord of the Rings 2. And that's despite big chunks of the book in Lord of the Rings being skipped over in the films. My other takeaway from the film was that there were large portions that just seemed to blend into each other. Aside from the scenes that were aesthetically different from Arrakis, or that had a giant worm in it, or that had a big dramatic set piece, like the scenes with Paul engaging in some good clean fun with the Fedaykin, it just feels at times like a bit of a chore to watch over the periods that you're asked to watch it. Stunning for sure. It's an incredibly shot film, and if that's what you want brilliant aesthetics, you want impeccable vibes, you just want to sit there and just take in the vibes and the scenery and enjoy Arrakis and enjoy Gady Prime and how awesome and cool all of it looks, then this film is going to be great for you. But it feels unbalanced. It almost feels like it falls into some of the traps of adapting Dune that the first one managed to evade. And while there are moments I loved, I enjoyed, I don't think it's changing cinema. At least not in the way that the Dune Part 2 hardcore lovers are suggesting it. I guess ultimately what I'm trying to say is that Dune is just Star Wars for people who listen to Tool. So to wrap the whole thing up, I just want to hit a few key points. First of all, I just want to emphasize that I think the film is a 7 out of 10. Now, that doesn't mean I hate it, doesn't mean I think it's terrible. I think that there's more to like about this film than to dislike. And I just want to emphasize that and be very clear that 7 out of 10 is a perfectly good rating to give a film. Now, admittedly, I might have some terrible taste because films that I think are 7 out of 10, well, I won't name them here, but because I've probably made some of you mad enough. But I just want to say 7 out of 10, it's a good film. It's a good film. Would I go out of my way to watch it again at the cinema? Probably not. Will I watch it when it comes to streaming? Probably, if I happen to have the thing. That's generally how I feel about it. And I want to stress that in the context of a complete trilogy, Dune Part 2 might be reevaluated, for better or for worse. Certainly, I think that when it's placed in its proper context, when we have the final part of the trilogy, we can then have a much more serious and maybe a bit less, hot take, intense kind of discussion around the film, how it fits into the narrative that they're trying to present, and how good of an adaptation it really is from the books. But with all of that, I do need to say that is the video. I can't believe I've done a movie rant video. I've finally become the lowest form of YouTuber. I guess it happens to us all. Well, with that, everyone, thank you for listening if you made it this far. I need to thank my proofreader, who is my partner, and I need to thank her for inspiration, because it was the conversation we had on the bus back from the cinema where a lot of this stuff got teased out of me, and I was like, well, I didn't really think I was going to make a video about it, but then I saw all those videos that were like, it's changing cinema, and I was like, wow, we should probably do something about that. I also need to thank the patrons and members over here on YouTube, members plural, emphasis on that. But I particularly need to thank the top tier patrons, Drone Riff, Mercutio, Kazushida, John N, who are the top tier Patreon subscribers. Go over to the Patreon, and if you want early access to the videos, you want to vote on the video topics, you want to be in the super secret cool bit of the Discord, yeah, the Patreon's where you go for all of that stuff. You also get to see like early drafts of scripts and all sorts of good things. So go check it out. But I also need to thank specifically the members, plural, YouTube members. We finally have 2, Nadir Jiwa and Katie Marshall. Thank you to them. They also get kind of most of the benefits you would get on the Patreon. I try my best to keep it one-to-one, but it's a bit much to juggle. And I promise I will get the old emotes and badges and stuff like that sorted. I am on it, I promise. I just have a million things to do, like making one-off videos that I do because I got mad at movies. But with that, everyone, I was going to say, this is a fantastic book. If you haven't read the Dune trilogy and you just sat for all of that, go give it a read. It's really good. But yeah, with that, everyone, take it easy. I will catch you all on the next video. Bye-bye.